I'm not sure if you've seen the video by Jewish Voice for Peace. Amazingly, it's had over 1 million hits. It's incredible how fast lies travel. So, Jewish Voice for Peace, who are they? A far-left American organisation whose ultimate goal is the destruction of the world's only Jewish state. More on them later, but first, let's look at their pathetic propaganda piece.
What would happen if you built a refuge for a persecuted people in a place where another people already lived?
In 1947, before Israel was established, 50% of the population of mandatory Palestine was Jewish.
Many Jews fled harsh persecution in anti-Semitic Europe, especially the Nazi Holocaust. Zionists encouraged massive immigration to historic Palestine, at that time a British colony.
It was never a British colony. The British were awarded a mandate so they could facilitate the creation of a Jewish national home.
Where Jews had an age-old connection and where small Jewish communities had long existed among larger groups of indigenous peoples.
The Jews are the indigenous people. They saw large empires conquer the land and transfer large populations of non-indigenous people. But the Jews are the indigenous ones, and there has been a continuous Jewish presence there for over 3,000 years.
But when the UN offered the Jewish immigrants the majority of the land for a new state called Israel,
this totally ignores 70% of the land that was given to a Saudi Arabian family, the Hashemites, who established Jordan in the majority of mandatory Palestine. Jews were supposed to get 100%, then 30%, and they finally settled on 18% of what was mandatory Palestine.
For the indigenous Palestinians who lived there, it was a massive destruction of life. They rejected the UN's partition plan, and several Arab states invaded the new state of Israel. By the end of the fighting, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. And when 750,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled during fighting,
and Israel didn't expel the Arabs. The leaders of the Arab world ordered the Arabs out of the land to return after the Jews were driven into the sea. Never did it occur to them that the new Jewish state would defeat the combined armies of the neighbouring Arab countries. In his 1973 memoirs, Syrian Prime Minister Khaled al-Azzam said, "Since 1948, we have been demanding the return of the refugees to their homes, but we ourselves are the ones who encouraged them to leave. Only a few months separated our call to them to leave and our appeal to the United Nations to resolve on their return." When Israel was established, 20% of its population were Arabs. Today, 20% of its population are Arabs. In contrast, while there were 850,000 Jews in the Arab world before 1948, today there's less than 3,000.
Palestinians who fled tried to return to their homes where the new state now stood. They were permanently barred by the Israeli government. While over 100,000 of their relatives and neighbors who hadn't left became second-class citizens of the new state.
Paragraph 13 of the Declaration of Independence provides that the State of Israel would be based on freedom, justice and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race or sex,
along with the new Jewish majority. Today, Palestinian refugees and their descendants number in the millions. Most are in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jordan. Many are spread throughout the world.
So, Jewish Voice for Peace pretend that they care about Palestinian rights and claim that Israel makes them second-class citizens. So let's see how the Palestinians are treated in the countries listed on the map. In Lebanon, Syria and Egypt, Palestinian refugees can't enter politics or vote. They face fierce travel restrictions, so fierce that in Lebanon they need a permit to leave their own neighbourhood. They have no access to healthcare or state schools. They truly are second-class citizens. Actually, they're not even that, as they're denied citizenship. In contrast, in Israel, Palestinians own property. They can vote, they hold political office, they can travel, and they have the same access to education and healthcare as the Jews. One more thing. Why are we calling them refugees? when 99% of them are third or fourth generation refugees. My grandfather was a refugee from Poland. Nobody classes me as a refugee.
Many are spread throughout the world, with millions still living in refugee camps.
Wait a minute, how did 750,000 refugees become millions?
Seeking to return to their homeland. To sum up, one group of refugees found a much-needed home, but in the process, a new group of refugees was created.
They didn't find a home. They returned home after 2,000 years of persecution. Where did Jewish Voice for Peace expect them to go? Europe, where 6 million had been burnt in the ovens? The Muslim world, where almost 1 million were displaced? This should be the most inspirational story for all downtrodden people. After 2,000 years of persecution, the Jews overcame their oppressors and re-established their national home.
Here's the second thing to understand. Israel was founded as a Jewish state. But now ask yourself, what exactly does that mean? People had lots of ideas about what a Jewish state should look like. Some called for equality for all citizens. But what was created, in practice, was institutional discrimination against non-Jews.
17 out of 100 members of the Knesset are Arabs, 12 of them in Arab parties. Arabs sit on the Supreme Court. Indeed, Arab judges sent former Jewish Prime Minister and a former Jewish President to jail. Arabs serve in the IDF, many as officers. The second highest ranking police official in Israel is an Arab. Arab doctors and nurses are the backbone of the medical sector. Arabs play for the national football team. Just exactly what institution discriminates?
Israel has never defined its borders. In fact, they still hold on to land, the West Bank and Gaza, that they conquered in the war in 1967.
The 1949 armistice lines were temporary borders drawn up between Jordan and Israel, both countries agreeing that these weren't permanent borders but temporary ceasefire lines. It's important to remember that Israel was at war with Jordan, not Palestine, for the land, and Jordan has subsequently given up any claim to that land. Israel does not hold on to Gaza. There's no Jews in Gaza. There haven't been any Jews in Gaza since 2005.
Since then, Israel has built Jewish settlements throughout the occupied West Bank, building Jewish-only cities and supplying them with infrastructure like roads and army camps, schools, and even a college. Military occupations are meant to be temporary.
Tell it to the Chinese in Tibet, the Turks in Cyprus, the Russians in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, all whom occupied pre-existing nations. An occupation can only legally exist when one sovereign entity occupies another sovereign entity. Which sovereign nation did Israel occupy? There was never a Palestinian country.
In the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians live on the same land, but must live under two completely separate and unequal systems of Israeli law.
Palestinians live under Palestinian Authority law. Would Jewish Voice for Peace rather they lived under Israeli law as Israelis? Actually, I'm sure the gay population of Ramallah would much prefer that.
To maintain the occupation, Israel has demolished thousands of Palestinian homes and orchards, confiscated Palestinian land, all to gain maximum land, while making life so difficult for Palestinians that they will either leave or be too afraid to resist.
Who are the Palestinians more afraid of, Israel or the Palestinian Authority? The Palestinian Center for Public Opinion said more than half of Palestinians in East Jerusalem say that they prefer living under Israeli law. Just 42% would prefer to be under Palestinian rule.
Now that you understand the problem, what about the solution? What about peace talks?
Talking of peace talks, let's go through them one by one. 1937, the Peel Commission. The Arabs were offered 4/5 of mandatory Palestine. Rejected. 1948 Partition Plan. The Jews accepted and established Israel. The Arabs immediately rejected. 1949, the Armistice Agreement. Israel and the Arab neighbours accept peace. Jordan instantly annexes the West Bank. 1967, the Allon Plan. Israel offers approximately 65% of the West Bank back to the Jordanians. Rejected. 1978-79, the Camp David Accords. Israel makes peace with Egypt and offers to withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza with conditions. Rejected. 1993 Oslo Accords. Success! The Palestinian Liberation Organization accepts Israel's right to exist. Israel hands over governance of most of the West Bank and Gaza to them. In 2000-2001, the Camp David-Tabah summits. Israel offers virtually everything the Palestinians demanded. 95% of the West Bank and Gaza would become the Palestinian state, and Israel offered $30 billion to the Palestinians still classed as refugees by the rest of the Arab world. This was rejected. 2005, the Gaza disengagement. Israel completely withdraws from Gaza, forcibly removing Jews from their homes. Gaza has since come into the control of proscribed terrorist organisation Hamas, who continue to fight a civil war with the Palestinian Authority and have fired 13,000 rockets from Gaza into Israel. 2008, Echad al-Mut. Israel once again offers all of the West Bank and Gaza with East Jerusalem as its capital. Guess what? It was rejected.
There's a movement with hundreds of thousands of people just like you across the world.
People just like you? Notice how they're all white? Because they're white, middle-class Westerners living off of Daddy's trust fund.
Protesting, educating, divesting, and boycotting.
Jewish Voice for Peace massively advocates BDS across all their communications. So let's just look at JVP and some of their friends. They supported the Free Gaza movement, whose founder, Greta Berlin, tweeted a link to a video entitled "Zionists Ran the Holocaust and Concentration Camps." They hypocritically support the Palestinian right to return, but not the Jewish law of return. BDS opposes a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution with the right of return for Palestinian refugees and no law of return, which basically ends the world's only Jewish state. The founder of BDS, Omar Barghouti, was born in Qatar, grew up in Egypt, graduated in the USA, yet holds an Israeli passport that he won't give up. He lives in Israel and studied at Tel Aviv University. That's great boycotting, son. I'm Damon Lenszner for the Israel Advocacy Movement. Please subscribe on YouTube down there. Follow us on Twitter up there. And find us on Facebook everywhere.